Hey, everybody. Welcome to the very first episode of In the Seaweeds, Ship Angel production, with a goal of creating a podcast a little bit differently. The idea is to have some of the most successful people in the industry come on and talk about their journey in detail. And I am super excited to welcome Patrik Berglund as our first guest, CEO and co-founder of Xeneta. Thank you so much for joining me, Patrik.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Graham. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you. So, take us back to the early days, Patrik, growing up in Scandinavia. What was it like? Were you entrepreneurial in your younger years, your teenage years? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, Scandinavia is a very sort of protected and safe environment, right? But if I if I were to think back about sort of what is it from my childhood that I think could indicate that I would go and build something, either together with somebody or by myself, would be a few things. I come from a family with a lot of entrepreneurs, and then secondly, I started very early on buying and selling things online. So I think I always sort of had this a little bit like a hustling gene where I was trying to find good deals, right? And whether I bought stuff online and then sold it in person or found things to just flip because they were cheaply priced or online and you could sell them through other channels a bit more expensive. I think I always had a knack for that at least. And then with the sort of family background, I think there was more, let's say, input to create more sophisticated business models than just buying and selling. So I think maybe that is the things from my childhood that I can think of, and sort of that freedom that you get when you're a kid living in Scandinavia.
Super interesting. Um, and so when it's in your family, you kind of see it firsthand, and I think it gives you a bit more of a view that it's possible. Because I think, with me growing up, I was similar to you, and a lot of my friends didn't have that in their family, and they kind of feel like it's impossible to do. But when you kind of live with it in your family, it feels a bit more doable when you see people do great things.
I agree, but if you really think about it, there's quite a few that sort of goes south as well. So you also get the other side where it can be a bit more daunting because you can see
Yeah.
the risk, right?
Yes.
And that's why I think it was crucial for me to be fairly young when I started my first business, uh, because as the older you get, the more sort of nuances you can see on everything, and the more risk. So I think for me, if I think about the Zenata journey in particular, it is so full of risk because if you don't get that critical amount of data, you get nothing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And being willing to give that a stab and grind it, I think maybe that is some of the aspects that required some sort of youth or naive youth perspective, to be honest.
Yeah. And that kind of, so it's somewhere around the summer of 2011. You're sitting in your at your desk in Kuna, and you either have Xeneta formed in your head or loosely formed. Like, what's going through your head? Like, you're in an old fashioned industry. You're working for a giant company that's quite corporate. You are super young. How do you, like, what's going through your head?
I think I think the only thing I could think of, and this is where I met Thomas, right, my co-founder, and I think to us, we it made such logical sense that if this was a bit different, it would be much better, right? So I think that was really the main driver, that sort of deep conviction that this industry is so volatile that and paired with that opaqueness, it is so inefficient. So if we could make it transparent, that would have huge value.
And what was it like? I mean, I remember back then when you spoke to senior industry figures, they would have been, still kind of understanding what a startup was, and you're trying to do something that's completely different. It pretty much doesn't exist. Like, I guess if you just listen to that feedback, you're probably like, oh, it's not worth doing. Like, how do you take that on board, decipher the good stuff, and still have the kind of guts to go for it?
Yeah, I think we actually left Kina with a few people saying this will never work. I actually have vivid memories of a meeting where I sat down and one of my managers said it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, right? So you gotta be you gotta have quite a strong conviction that they're wrong because they have decades of experience, right?
Yes.
And I think the key thing for me has been I think I've experienced the pain that lack of transparency
Yeah.
gives or causes. And that made me so determined that if we really could get all the pieces to come together, that would be a solution that would be embraced. Because if you think back to when we actually left, right, and you start on this grueling grinding to get companies to provide you with proprietary data, right, on trades where you didn't have any other data. So there is a process to first convince them about the problem and the pain, and then the solution, and then that there's a path to that solution that's going to take quite a lot of time, but they got to stay with you and go through that. So I think to me, being just, and this is probably where the age thing comes in. I'm not sure I would have actually done that, those, let's say, 4 or 5 years over again, but
Yeah.
it comes from that conviction that they're not wrong, because it in hindsight I can see that it seemed very, very difficult to do. But when you're in that age and it's like you've just started your professional career a few years ago, you've experienced that pain, you have such a conviction that this could be solved in a much smarter way, then we just went for it. And being able to have have that grit and determination when it was tough, because there's been a lot of times where me and Thomas would go out and we would talk about the fact that I'm not sure this is ever going to fly, right? And
Yeah.
then shake it off and agree it makes so much sense, so we should give it an even harder push.
Yeah. I mean, this is one thing I think, from this program that we're trying to get across as well, is that, you know, it's, I mean, the journey that you've been on, the company you've built, we'll talk a lot more about it, but it's incredible. Very few people get to kind of ever do it, especially at the scale that you've done it at. But I don't think people understand, to your point, when yourself and Thomas are coming back, you're getting all G'd up for a big meeting with somebody, they need this product, but they're too busy on something else or they don't have the vision. The amount of times you have to pick yourself up from the ground, like I would say a very high percentage in the 90s of people just would not be able for that rejection over and over again.
Yeah, I think I've always looked at these things as like, if you have, and it's a very simple analogy, right? If you have a room full of a lot of doors, when you build a company, most of those doors is going to be locked. You won't be able to
Yeah.
open them. But if you just have the stamina to go and try the next door, next door, next door, then eventually you'll find an open door with somebody who gets it, who understands it and believe in it, and then that energy and that incredible feeling of like, yes, there is somebody out there. And I think they call them the early adopters, right?
Yes.
And I have distinct memories of companies and personas and people that just got it in the early days, right? And those meetings, if I still think back to them, they make me so happy, right? And
Yeah.
now there's a lot more open doors, but there's still all kinds of struggles to convert companies to become customers. It's not like
Yeah.
we have a product that is just selling itself. You need to build proper relationships. It's still,
Educate.
a very relationship driven industry. And then you got to
Yeah.
have very, very compelling business cases. And then if you put all of that together in the mix with, great data, a phenomenal product, and colleagues around me that is absolutely brilliant, then you convert business. But you still have a lot of closed doors.
Yes. And I think, it's 2025. A lot of people listening to this, will think about where freight technology is now, where supply chain software is now in a post-COVID world. But, even skipping a few years, let's go from 2012 to like 2015, which is exactly a decade ago. And I remember this vividly too because I was building my
Yeah.
last company. Um, like if you compare 2015 to 2025, do you see a very significant difference? Are you like, the industry was here and now it's very much here in that decade?
In some way, I would say it feels like it hasn't changed at all, right? It's
Yeah.
but it, in another way, I would say it has changed. There is a lot more companies that are interested in rethinking how they're doing supply chain, transportation, logistics, procurement than it used to be in the past. I used to have companies, that we either work with or tried to work with that argue that this is how we've done it for decades. I find far less of them now and
Nice.
much more curiosity and even quite a lot of companies that are sort of super um, innovative and on the edge when it comes to technology and how they are willing to debate and assess whether they can do something more efficient or smarter today than it was in the past. So I do think there are some changes in that, but if you really take a helicopter view, there's still a lot of the same processes and people relationship driven things that's going on.
Yeah.
But I also think that there is a big shift in back in, let's say, 2010 to 2015, there was a belief that this industry would be, almost disrupted and radically changed overnight. And I remember we early on tried to talk about more of a transformative journey than disruption, because I think it is so complex to move a product from, let's say, inland China to inland Germany. There's so much that happens with so many different stakeholders involved that it's not equivalent to me, and it never has been to like a booking.com or stuff like that. But it used to be a lot of oomph around that notion that it could be disrupted like that. Now I see a lot more, let's say, on one side, people are much more thoughtful and knowledgeable on what can be improved and transformed. And then on the other side, it seems to be quite a lot of disappointment from one, let's say, group of people almost, and finger pointing that it wasn't disrupted. So everything kind of failed. And that's different. And I think that's a bit sad because to me, it's whether you fail or succeed partially or really succeed with the company you're building, I think I would want people to cheer people more along. And maybe it's
Yes.
naive, maybe it's, but those who really take that step and risk everything and go
Yeah.
and build something for other people to use and leverage comes with, normally all the best intentions in the world, and they should be rooted for and celebrated, especially in our industry, I think, because it's way more complex than creating, I think, a social media. It's which is, very hard to grow, but conceptually we can all understand it, right? But this requires deep domain knowledge, and what is being, done in the US or what's being done in Europe versus Asia is radically different than how supply
Yeah.
chains are treated and orchestrated. So it's very complex from my point of view. So yeah, I think I see a big change in both the willingness to sort of improve and iterate on and leveraging technology with the actual core players. And to me, core players are shippers, forwarders, and carriers, right?
Yes.
And air and ocean carriers. And then there is this weird or a bit strange transition of just people rooting for and expecting some sort of disruption and the disappointment that never came with that. But I
Yeah.
still think it's more of a transformative journey for this industry.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to your point that there's less and less kind of older style software companies, and one of the things that I try to think about a lot is as well as when you're building in supply chain software, it is this massive intersection between, as you said, having great domain knowledge, but also knowing how to build great products. And to build great products, you have to be incredibly passionate. You have to know how to build software. You have to be okay with taking a longer road to build something, and it kind of comes true in your brand. And Xeneta is one of the has always been one of those brands that just stands out for all of those right reasons. Sometimes I'll meet early stage supply chain software startup folks, and you know they will have the opposite way. They'll say, "Oh, I can code it with an outsourced one person, and I don't need to invest in this." How it was that something that was like in your mind from day one, that you were going to build not just a great brand but great software? You were not going to try and build MVPs all the time. You wanted to build a great brand and you wanted to build great products. How does that kind of become part of who you are?
Think it's interesting because I think on one side I'm a product person like you, Graham, but
Yeah,
I think you have much more you're much more technologically tech savvy than I am. I think I'm more the sort of industry pain and product sort of side of things. But I think what happened in my journey is that I paired up with some great product and data people. So
well,
it became very clear for us early on that there, or for me, that there is a side of this business that I don't really truly deeply know as well as you do, I believe. But I respect that area of it. So I think the truth is that we let product and data people run with that with freedom and autonomy. And you can see that in the company today. We don't have an outsourced rate management staff sitting in the Philippines or something like that. We have them in
yeah,
Oslo, right?
yeah,
It's part of our core business. And I understand conceptually the value of that. And I appreciate it because I've seen it over 13 years, right? And we have everything of tech is sitting with us. It's primarily based in Oslo, but it's all like fully owned, and it would be unthinkable to pull it out and sort of outsource it for us. It's
yeah,
equally important to me and weighted as, to be honest, finance or sales, because I
yes,
think all these building blocks needs to come together to create a solid company. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be looking at how do we do things as efficient as possible. So we always measure that, right? So how do we ensure that if we have a rate management team sitting in Oslo, how can we measure the efficiency of them so that the argument is that we can find the best talented people that could be more productive and accurate and create better outputs for our customers versus an outsourcing low cost sort of alternative. And I think that's
yes.
worked phenomenally well.
Absolutely. And when you think about your base in Oslo, and you think about like how you've scaled the company, many tens of millions of ARR, massive market value, a product that's used by the biggest brands in the world every day. Not many companies in supply chain software have ever done that. In terms of the journey, Patrick, as you've got bigger and bigger, has there ever been moments of like, the capital markets or ventures saying, it's great to be in Oslo, but hey, why don't you move your headquarters to London or somewhere else? Have you ever had that kind of a thought process? Because it's amazing to keep it where it started.
Yeah. Could be a bit of a rabbit hole, but the short answer is no, to be honest. I think
Yeah,
if you look at everything, whether it's um, software engineers or salespeople, I think you'll find that Oslo is pretty
yeah,
okay from a cost point of view. It's not even nearly close to sort of Silicon New York price tags, but it's far more expensive than some of the low cost alternatives. And so I
yeah,
think it you need to play on the strengths that the location actually can provide. Meaning, when we attract people, we offer them a way of living, right? So
yes.
if you want to change your lives, we're 55 or 60 different nationalities on 230
Wow.
people, right? I have a handful of Norwegian colleagues, right? So we've always brought people to Norway, and I think it's not just about comp, but it's a sort of what kind of life do we offer these people that is actually moving here, and that gives a benefit, and a benefit that you can leverage. Right now, the reason why I smiled a bit in the beginning is that purely if you look at it financially, from tax point of view and stuff like that, maybe Oslo isn't the best place in the world at the moment. But I think you can see that the world is changing for some of these other locations as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, all
Yeah.
in all, it's a decent place, I would say.
Yeah, I think it speaks true to your values as well of being able to kind of keep this as HQ Oslo, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You know, when I think about my own journey over the last while, I'm part of a few WhatsApp groups in the industry, and there's a group of freight tech CEOs that you're too cool and Xeneta's too big to be part of, and we had this we had this conversation recently about it wasn't quite this, but I, you know, everybody agreed that if there was like a Noah's Ark and there needed to be one supply chain software founder to go on it, you got more votes than anybody. You know, we there was a couple of particularly young folks at Munich, and they were standing behind you at the stand, and none of them believed that you were Patrik because you were, you know, dressed like I am today. And you were just talking to people at the stand. You were so normal, and they just couldn't believe it. They thought you would have a suit on, and maybe you'd have a few assistants or even a minder around you or something. Like how, you know, when you do get that level of success, Patrik, how do you kind of like rein yourself in? We're all human beings. Like how do you kind of how do you stay so grounded now? Like you're walking around the floor of Munich the way you did. Like, you know, you could just sit in your office and smoke cigars if you wanted to. Like how what's is that you? Is that deeply you from your like how do you do that?
Listen, I don't find any deep, meaningful joy in some of the stuff that you sort of allude to when it comes to like I am. It's interesting. Maybe it's again back to some sort of like Norwegian, Scandinavian value sets. To be honest, I don't. I really find it sad with hierarchies and that people have a position above anyone else. What interests me about people, and I genuinely mean this, is their brains, right? And
Hmm.
that to me doesn't matter which position you have or what you've actually accomplished or built. I have some fascinating friends and acquaintances that you know has done almost nothing with their professional career, but they have an amazing set of things that they've done and accomplished in their private lives or in their spare time or hobbies or whatever, right? So I don't know. To me, it's just not super attractive with a lot of the, let's say, more posh uh, things. It's funny when you mention it because I'm not. I don't think we're successful enough at all. I think we have so much unaccomplished, untapped potential. Like we're not even nearly where I think we should be. So I don't know, Graham. It's funny you bring this up, and it's an interesting question.
It's
But I
also
don't. Yeah, I don't
exactly.
think I put any admiration or respect for what you sort of picture you portray.
I would exactly expect you to say that as well. Um, but we, you know, I see it. Shifting gears a little bit, Patrik, in terms of COVID. Um, Obviously the entire globe was once in a lifetime kind of event. It was also really, really, um, you know, uh, supply chain centric in lots of ways. I had friends who didn't care about what I did for years, saying, "How come I can't get my barbecue?" or "How come I can't get my new TV?" Um, you know, you had a front row seat, and Zanetta played a big part in helping, particularly shippers, but the entire industry to try get some sort of semblance of it. Um, could you take us back to that? Like, what was COVID like? Was it absolutely a crazy time?
Yeah, I get like seriously chills thinking about the first few days when we started realizing what is happening. And I think we quickly realized I had a phenomenal team around me. And I think we quickly realized a few things in our conversations. A, nobody knows. There is nobody we can go to and get some relevant experience. What does this mean? What's going to happen, right? And then we started to see a lot of companies reacting to shutting down their factories, their stores, starting to refuse to pay bills. And if you think about the type of companies we work with, this was like unprecedented. These are like some of the biggest companies in the world, right? So it was always been very stable. And I think we did two things well. We said, A, let's try and pause any decisions, any business decisions that comes our way. And I have concrete examples like this. Some of the biggest companies in the world that for instance wanted to either not pay or churn their contracts, where we say, hey, we're a tiny company, right? We don't want you to even think about this. We will go for free if required for another 6 to 9 months just to see how this plays out. Because at that point we've spent 5, 6, 7 years getting a position to work with these companies, and now it was about to be sort of tossed out the window, right? So I think we did really well, saying no business decisions are made for the next 6 to 9 months. Let's see how this plays out. We will support you with everything we learn. We will make sure that you understand what other peers and other companies in this industry are doing in order to navigate this situation. So we quickly huddle around. We did bunch of round tables, webinars, and then the other thing we did well is the internal meetings. Right, we did weekly get-togethers with the entire company just to talk about what the hell is going on, and also be very honest and transparent that we don't know. We don't know how to lead through this, but we will try a set of things just to see if we can, get the company through this period. It
Wow.
was grueling, to be honest.
It's
And I told my wife that I was sitting in our basement on Zoom with my daughter, who was homeschooled, right next to me, trying to run this business without having any clue about how this is going to play out, and trying to be a father that is teaching her what she needs to do in school. Like, it was absolutely crazy, and I was really worn thin, to be honest. But I had great colleagues who helped me through it.
wow. It's so interesting to hear you say you still get chills thinking about it. Obviously, that strategy worked really, really well. And then you did a pretty significant funding round in 2022, I think $80 million. What was that like? Were you kind of starting to think about, okay, some of these decisions have obviously worked very well for us. We're coming out of COVID. We've kind of created this category, defined it, and won it. We need to take it and run. What were you thinking there?
I think I think we raised, actually, we raised in 22 and 20 sorry 2020 and 2022, right?
Yeah.
And I think, to me, it's just both of those were quite opportunistic because the market was so good. None of them we actually desperately needed money, but it was an opportunity to grab money and to try and grow the company from those resources, arguably and hopefully faster, right? But the processes are always quite similar from my point of view, in terms of the time you need to invest in meeting them, building the relationship, convincing them about the business case, and then one more thing, which I think touches back to what we talked about, like what kind of complexity it is, right? Because if you're an outsider looking in, you could look at Xeneta and you think, oh, maybe a procurement platform, or booking platform, and you got to contextualize it more, right? Because to me, it's about that transparency, the fact that we have buyers and sellers using this as a single source of truth, and what are the then subsequent building blocks, right, that you can build when it comes to futures, derivatives, and why is this valuable, just sitting on that data? Because if you think about it, they're not making their buying decision on our platform. They're leveraging our data outside to
It's
make all these decisions. So I think when I go through the funding processes, we spend a lot of time educating the investors so that they truly understand what we're doing and how the market works. But once you find the right people, because that's ultimately what it is, that you enjoy doing this with, and I think we've done that for I would say every single investment round, then
Yes.
it's okay. But it's not something that gives me crazy amount of energy because it's time taken away from building what I care about.
Yes. That makes perfect sense. I think one of the other things that a lot of people admire about you and Xeneta, as well as cr- kind of expanding this category, creating it, but also like thinking about pricing in a different way. Thinking about a great software product has incredible benefit to a company. And Xeneta is obviously one of those. And the great software companies have always been able to get a fair price for that extreme value. And I think it's been lacking in our industry, Patrik. A lot of people sell themselves short, or they go for a model that doesn't make economic sense. Xeneta to me is like best in class premium product. Um, and I'm sure if you looked back and you looked at, the value creation, like how do you instill that? Again, that's something that's so rare. I see some of my own startup investments. I'm looking and they've got great logos. And then I'm looking at the contract values and I'm like, guys, these people would pay 4x, they'd pay 10x. And they're just happy to get in. And by the time they get in at that price, it's going to take them years to get up. Is that something that was kind of again in your DNA from day one, or has it evolved? Or
Yeah, I mean, of course, we started cheaper, and it's interesting when I look back to one of like our first sales leaders wanted to do a fraction of the price with the argument that we will get every single shipper in the world if we just do this, right? So like doing one third of any closest competitor would be charging, right? So I have very distinct memories where we sat down and we say, the value is too big. And if we get this data, we're not comparable to any competitors. So we will deliver unique data that nobody else have. And if we can really create a process where we agree, we establish the value together with the prospect or customer, and we do that properly, and then consult them as much as we need to find that and realize that value. What I like is that it's not a price you push. It becomes a conversation where you say, we agree on this value. And when we're there, I deserve a small chunk of that value.
yes,
Now, I also think that I have great pride in sort of I want to do something that is valuable, right? Myself. So if I do something that is valuable, I should I should be paid for that as well. So it's not only, the product. And I think when I say I mean like Xeneta and our people. They want to deliver something that is meaningful value. And I love the fact that if you do this and then tell the prospect or customer that you have multi-year lenses on, I don't need you to pay me today, but I'm willing to
yes,
invest in a long-term partnership. So if it takes me 10 years, I will grind it until we get there. But if we can create something that is fair over the next 3-4 years, then I should get this premium price and you will be happy. And you can internally, if you do the math, you can report this ROI, right? And
yes.
that multiplier has benchmarks, and we're way above that benchmark in so many relationships. So we're still giving away way too much.
Lot. Wow. That is so like that. What you just described, I can't think of another company that has kind of executed in any way, shape, or form at that level. And again, customer, I aspire to it on a much smaller scale, but customers, as you said, are happy to pay when they see the ROI, and they know that they get there. You've talked a little bit about um, the journey has been amazing. You've built something great. You've got a great team around you, but again, it's still early. If you could get a time machine and you go to this time 2030, um, what kind of major differences would you like to see if you walked into Zanet Oslo or you looked at the website? What's the kind of high level vision for the next half a decade?
I think there's a lot of things that needs to happen, right? But I think when we left Kühnenagel, I think on our best days, we had this idea that, there will be a before Xeneta and an after Xeneta, right? We're going to leave a dent, and Xeneta changed this in the industry. And I still think we have a long way to go before we can look back and say, okay, look at that dent we created, right? And that's more of the sort of transformative journey. To me, the way they buy and sell is so inefficient. So if we get at some point can say we've fixed those inefficiencies, and it's now more focused on between carrier BCO, carrier forwarder carrier BCO,
Yes.
it's way more of a partnership collaboration here, and price is just a result of the market, and Xeneta has that market, and a lot of the friction is taken out. When that is happening at scale, then I think I'm happy about 2030. But it's
Yeah.
5 years, and I thought it would be maybe 5 to 7 years to do this from the beginning, and now we're 13 years in, and you're asking me what about 18 years in, right? And I'm still gonna say, as long as I see progress towards that, I'll be
Yes.
happy, right?
Yes.
But hopefully significant progress.
Yeah. Got it. And in terms of when we were together in Oslo recently, we talked a little bit about this, but you mentioned Thomas earlier, your co-founder, who's no longer in the business, and you've got big teams around the world reporting into you. You've got bigger teams around you, but the kind of, let's call it the founder role now, coupled with the CEO role, can be a pretty lonely place. And it's something that comes up when I speak to kind of young founders regularly. And I think sometimes they might have an opinion that, again, wrongly, that it's now easy for you, but would you agree that in some ways it's actually harder and it is very difficult?
Yeah. Listen, I think it's always hard, especially if the business is developing, because what you used to do yesterday is not going to cut it in the future. So you constantly got to evolve yourself, right? And I think the biggest challenge that I consistently find is that you got to always evolve yourself, but then for various periods of time, you need to be able to take sort of the elevator down and look at the smallest nitty-gritty details of what is actually happening. And then you got to take the elevator back up and see, are we strategically heading in the right direction, right? And I find that has always been the case, but it's quite a drain. When people say it's easier or a job is easy, it's because they're missing some of these challenges where you constantly go up and down, and you constantly need to change yourself to fit the role for the state of the business where it is, right? So I don't think it gets easier. It's different, but it's not easier. And I wouldn't say it's harder either. I think it's super hard in general.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you think back now, I mean, you just described the way you successfully run in supply chain software, a big business. Like, again, thinking back to that summer in Coonagall in 2011, I often think of it as, a part of your brain was awake and now your entire brain is firing on all cylinders. Like, if I got a time machine and went back to Kuna in that summer and brought you into an office and played this interview, like, are you, when I meet my old school friends and you think about what you do every day, like, do you ever have moments you're like, this is insane? Like, what you do now, being able to do what you do. Um, do you
But I
ever?
think you said it well. I think actually, Graham, I think you said it can be a bit lonely.
Yes.
It can be a bit lonely because ultimately you carry some responsibility regardless. I had a chairman who said it beautifully. He said, it can be whatever the mistake is, and you can point wherever in the org. Ultimately, it's your
It's yours.
responsibility, meaning you could have changed something prior to whatever that happened. So it's your responsibility. And I think that is a lonely job. Uh, yeah, and it's also lonely because from the example you gave, right? The more you travel and see the world, the more you do and experience, and then you go back to meet some childhood friend, you're not talking. I'm not saying one is right or wrong at all. It's not my point. You're not necessarily talking about the same thing with the same experience and the same interest, right? And that goes both ways. So you can feel a bit lonely from that point of view as well.
Yeah.
Uh, That
Definitely.
was maybe a bit depressing. Yeah.
No, not at all. I mean, this is exactly what we're trying to do here, is like talk about, again, that, to the, especially kind of young startup founders, that, it isn't, it's not a lot of people can kind of like get through that journey. It is very, very difficult. You need to be incredibly resilient. What is last couple of questions here? Um, what's a typical day in your life like? What does a typical day kind of look like?
If you're not traveling, it's pretty much
Okay.
the same, right? Getting
Okay.
up, get the dog out, say goodbye to the kids, go to the office, 10 to 12 meetings quite often, try to wrap it up and get home to some sort of dinner ish with the kids again, and then and then it's quite often some more work, to be honest. I
Wow.
try to sneak in some exercising in the morning. I make sure I
Okay.
always eat quite healthy, and then sleep. I don't mess around with sleep anymore. First 5 6 years, I
Wow.
could be crazy on that in terms of how few hours I could put in. But last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, I've been very straight on sleep. I think I function much better. But my normal days are pretty like A4 with these things, and that is also, if I'm going to loop back to the previous question, a lot of the things you kind of give up when you do what we do, Graham, is that you don't have a lot of friends that you
Yeah.
service and cater and meet up with regularly. It's not possible. Something's got to give. And when I got kids, I had to narrow down so hard to say it's like it's family and Xeneta, right? And
Yes.
then I do have friends, but we meet far less than what I would like.
Yeah. I think people forget about that. I'm sure, um, you get the odd call from old friends having a really nice long weekend or a week's holidays, and you would love to do it, but again, you sacrifice.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
And
um,
that's even before we talked about the mental piece, because
yeah,
you can, like, one of my biggest challenges is like, I'm around, but I'm not around
yeah,
because you're thinking about these, next few things that Zenera needs to take care of or solve or whatever it is, right? And
yeah,
that's a huge challenge for me personally. And maybe this is where I have my, I don't know, diagnostics or whatever is wrong with me, right? But find it so hard to just leave it behind and leave be,
yes.
right? So you might not be at the office, but you're still working.
Yes, yes. I think that's like a superpower. Like you can't switch it off. It's always with you. Like, and I was going to ask, like, what one habit outside of work that makes you a better operator, but that's probably a good example. Like where, you just don't switch off. You could be, uh, after your dinner with your family and you're sitting down, but you're still thinking about getting a contract over the line or a big meeting that you have the next day or whatever the case may be. There is no off switch really.
No, but I think it's also dangerous. Sometimes it can go too far, and you get sort of too fully consumed, so you might sort of lose your vision. I think they say you don't see the forest for the trees or whatever is the expression, right?
Yes.
But I think to me, I got a dog a few years ago. So when I go out in the forest, it helps me sort of a little bit detach, and then later on I can find better solutions, right? So yeah.
So, like, as you've kind of gone through the journey, you found like sleep is a superpower, getting out for walks, getting exercise, eating the right food. All of those things help, right?
Yeah, you're processing a lot of things when you sleep.
Yeah.
It's interesting that sometimes you can wake up with more clarity. So what
Yes.
I try to avoid is sort of working for the last 30 minutes before you're supposed to hit the pillow. So take a break and then
Yeah.
do some other activity, maybe just walk the dog or whatever, and then I go to sleep. Otherwise, I find myself too intensely focusing on work when I try to sleep. Whereas if I get that break, I will still process it, but more comfortably in my sleep, I believe.
Such a great point. I kind of have a similar view in my last journey. I would regularly, if something big was happening, I would go to the office on a Monday, sleep in the sofa in my office on Monday night, and work through till Tuesday. So basically, work from like 8 a.m. Monday till Tuesday at 6. And what I now realize is if I, have my creature comforts like 8 sleep and I get like 7.5 hours sleep, and I wake up at 6, I'm so fresher that I'm able to do, because what I didn't realize is that from 8 p.m. on Monday, my productivity was going this way and the mistakes were creeping in. I guess that's that's a superpower as well that you've learned along the journey. But in a way, it's also a sacrifice, right? I mean, you have to look after yourself almost like a kind of, you're training for an athletic event. You're eating the right food. It all feeds into the right mindset, doesn't it?
I honestly think building a company is equivalent to being an athlete at a high level. I'm dead serious about that.
Yeah.
And the sacrifices are similar as well.
Definitely. I totally agree. I think that's something, again, that people don't always appreciate. Um, what do you tell young people, Patrik, when they meet you, or they talk to you and they talk about starting a company, particularly in supply chain software? Um, do you kind of think that, we're still young enough in the curve here, that there's still a lot of great companies to be built? What kind of advice do you try to give to, like, young people, maybe Patrik at Kunenagel in the summer of 2011?
I
If
think it's a great question. I think to me, it's about understanding the pain, understanding who is it that you're solving what for, and what value does that have? Do they have a real pain on that? And do you understand the nuances of that pain? Right.
Yes.
And this is what I find with our some brilliant employees we've had, the curiosity to really understand what's going on in the target audience's world has been phenomenal. But that's the one thing I would recommend anyone starting a business as well. Like, be super curious and actually intimately, deeply understand the the problem that you're trying to solve, and why is it a problem, what kind of problem is it for the different stakeholders that you're selling to, and how do they experience that problem internally, externally, and so forth. The more you actually understand that, the more credible you will be, and the more likely to build a good solution for it.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Patrik. That was absolutely amazing and insightful. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you again for taking the time to join us in the very first episode of In the Seaweeds, which is a play on the words "in the weeds." I did want to call it in between two seaweeds, after the Zach Galifianakis show of Between Two Ferns, but the team thought I wasn't cool enough to pull it off, so we have to settle for this. But
Graham, thank you so much.
I am
Appreciate the invite. I really
I,
do. It's
I
always
am
a pleasure talking with you.
super super happy that you were our first guest, and thank you for kind of going deep today. I know it'll be helpful to a lot of people that hear, and look forward to speaking to you later and seeing you in hopefully sunny Barcelona
I'll
ish
see you
Barcelona in
before
a few
then,
months.
but I'll definitely look forward to spend time with you in Barcelona.
Thanks so much for that, Patrik. That was amazing.